Hello, hello, hello. Welcome to kind of extension to the Queen reviews. So I mentioned about, well, I didn't mention the live albums, but I mentioned Queen at the Beeb. And I thought, well, if I'm going to cover that, I better cover the live albums. And I'm not one for, I'm more like, I like more the studio albums than live material, but seeing it as part of my kind of Queen experience, I suppose I should talk about the first one up. The first one we're going to do is Live Killers, 22nd of June 1979. And I remember getting this quite early on. In my Queen experience. He says, I shall now magically make the artwork. Look, if I can tickle their feet. Look, see, it's like I've got it, but I haven't. But you can stream it. It's out there. You can stream it from YouTube Music and wherever, as soon as we're on YouTube. So I have listened to it this very day and reminded myself of its power. Yeah, the good thing about it is if you were a young kid with not a lot of money, it almost represented like an extension to the greatest hits album, because not only did you have the greatest hits, but you also had your first kind of introduction to some of the deep cuts from the album tracks like Death on Two Legs or 39 Dreamer's Ball, Get Down, Make Love, among the hits. So it was quite good in that respect. Again, this was taken from a couple of dates during their 79 European tour. It opens with the fast version of We Will Rock You, which again, when I first heard it, completely banjacks me because I'd never heard it before, and I didn't even know that they did, that they even did this. And look at the interesting thing about Queen, with the live material here, and subsequently is they're not afraid to mess around and have tracks smash into other tracks, do like medleys and whatnot. So it's not like some of these bands where you put on the live album and it feels very much like you're listening to the studio album. I mean, here, you have Killer Queen going in from Death on Two Legs, Bicycle Race leading into I'm in Love with My Car, which is pretty damn cool. You have an extended version of Now I'm Here, where they do some vocal gymnastics. And of course, who can forget the extended version of Brighton Rock, which features a drum solo from Roger Taylor and the extended guitar piece from Brian May. I think is this the one where he does Three Blind Mice with using his triple echo, his triple delay, which I always found fascinating because there's three delays going and they're panned. One's left, one's right, one's in the middle, and it all bounces around and he builds up the layers. And that was again, that was kind of quite inspiring to me as a player. I thought, oh, that's interesting. But yeah, I mean, it's quite a powerful set. I know that they left a couple of the tracks off that they were doing. Consulting the Wikipedia page, they didn't include Somebody to Love, Fat Bottom Girls, If You Can't Beat Them, and It's Late, which they played during that tour. But again, I think that's probably cut for time because it was originally a double album, and it would have probably it's just time constraints. I had the cassette of this. I had the cassette of it, and I think it was one of those cassettes that used to get a little bit used to slow down a bit, because again it was a big old tape, and you'd have to, you know, uh, tighten the spool with a pencil. Do you remember that? Just tighten it up a bit because it used to run a bit slack. And of course, for those kids, those young kids, and my statistical demographic here is, was it the 45 to 54 age range? You probably do remember cassettes, but those kids who don't remember cassettes, if you did have a slack cassette, there was a good chance it might get jammed between was it the capstan and the pincher? I don't know what any of this means. I just remember reading about it and your tape getting mangled. Very often you could rescue it and pull it out and wind it back in again, but sometimes tapes did die, all wrapped round the gubbins. I prefer to call it the gubbins, which I think sounds more technical and more knowledgeable than the capstan and the pincer. probably, or pincher. I'm probably remembering it wrong. Remember, don't forget to clean your heads and make sure your azimuth is adjusted. Uh, that's without noise reduction. Is it a metal tape, or is it just chrome? Those were the good old days. And then you just press a button and it's played into your ears. So yeah, it's again, I don't think it's particularly well recorded live album. It's a bit rough. It's a bit rough, I think it's a bit. It has that kind of bootleggy quality to it. Some tracks sound better than others. Trying to think of. I think. Let me just. Where's the one I thought sounded better? I think "Spread Your Wings" sounded pretty good, and so did "Don't Stop Me Now." But there are some overdubs on this, according to the Wikipedia page. But then most albums, live albums that were put out, um, well, from the 70s onwards, tended to be cleaned up again in the studio and bits, added or taken away if there were mistakes. Again, these aren't really a true representation of a live gig because they're fiddled with, studio jiggered. Tracks are moved around in the set listing again for time purposes because fitting them on an LP and whatnot. So this is why I'm always a little bit kind of about live recordings because they're not really a true representation. You know, but I'm not really a bootlegger either. So live is being there, if you know what I mean. Um, so yeah, I think again for me this was a really important record because it allowed me to listen to an awful lot of Queen for one price. Um, you know, again listened to it back. I remembered it really really well. It's part of my DNA, and it was quite surprising to think I haven't heard the album in many years. Crikey, 30 years maybe. But there we are. I remembered it. It's still there. It's like, I remember you. And I remember how important it felt, back in those days. How it's like, yeah, wow. And yeah, and it's I think it's not bad. It's a shame that it sounded a little bit dog rough, at the time. But you know, the fact that I don't feel the need to listen to it ever again kind of illustrates its importance to me. But again, remember, I prefer studio albums to live recordings, unless it's something unique like 801 Live, where they never made an album and the studio recording is the album. There are some exceptions to that rule before you start calling me a hypocrite. You know, or if the albums are presented, warts and all. Again, that very rarely happens. There are only a few bands that are like kind of brave enough to do that or promote the whole bootleggy kind of thing. So yeah, I mean, it's a really good illustration of what the band were capable of in 1979. It kind of acted as a weird stopgap between jazz and the game. I mean, when you think about it, they were really busy because they were doing the game album and Flash Gordon soundtrack, and they had this on the boil as well. I mean, to be a fan in 1979, 1980, you must have had Queen coming out of your ear holes, and I remember the artwork. I mean, not in the cassette, but from what I've seen, I've seen quite a few copies of these up close because they used to have them in the second-hand record shop. But I never bought them because they're live out. But I remember seeing and being quite impressed because you saw the lights. Queen had a very impressive light show at the time, and all the various shenanigans they got up on stage and whatnot. So yeah, very for those who like it, a very important document. Though I think at the time it was kind of panned because again, you've got to remember live albums were regarded as cheap and nasty and put out by the record companies and bands as a bit of an easy cash cow. They were given less regard than greatest hits albums because they were. The studio album was always king, and so you've got to remember that context when you see those reviews. It's again, if you think about now, there are very few bands or artists actually put out live albums, isn't it? It's quite interesting. It's only like the big ones like U2 and whatnot. Has Coldplay ever put out a live album? I don't know. I wouldn't. I'm not that. I have to ask my brother-in-law. But yeah, it's quite interesting to think now how important live albums are. They're not uh, interesting. But anyway, that was, he says, pretending to have the album. That was Queen's Live Killers from 1979. It's good, isn't it? Isn't it good? I'm clever at this. And that's that. I'm going to do Live Magic. I might talk about some of the DVDs because we could do that. That extends the Queen thing out further before we move on to the next one. Squeeze every last drop of juice out. The next one in this sequence will be Queen at the Beeb and possibly the live on air one. I might do it in one video. I might split them. I don't know. It all depends. I'll have a look because it's all kind of overlapping. Anyway, thanks for watching. Hopefully you've enjoyed the video. If you haven't, there's really bugger all I can do about it. Consult your priest. And with that, there's only one more thing to say, that is ta-da.